I'm Rachel Monroe, 34 years old, and I thought I understood what it meant to be blindsided by betrayal until the morning of my brother's wedding, when I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Don't go to the wedding. Check your husband's garage first." I thought it was a mistake or some weird prank, but my hands were already shaking as I walked toward that garage door. It was early fall and the light was soft, the kind of morning where nothing should feel threatening, but something about that message made my heart beat sideways. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to hold your breath, walking toward a truth you weren't ready to face. My name is Rachel, and for the past 5 years, I've lived in a quiet town about 20 minutes outside of Nashville, Tennessee. I'm a marketing executive, the kind who runs on coffee and color-coded spreadsheets, and I married Brian in my late 20s after we met at a friend's birthday party in college. He was warm, steady, said all the right things. We didn't have a fairy tale wedding, just a small candlelit ceremony with close family and a backyard reception, but it felt right. Kevin, my older brother by 3 years, gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying. He's always been my safe place ever since our parents split when I was 15. Kevin took on more than he should have back then, but he never once made me feel like a burden. I think that's why I was so happy when he and Haley found their way back to each other. They dated in college, broken up when she moved out west for work, and then, like something out of a movie, reconnected at a reunion years later. The timing felt perfect. Kevin had grown a little more grounded, and Haley had this calm confidence about her that seemed to balance him. When they got engaged, he asked me to be his maid of honor without a second thought, and I dove headfirst into helping them plan everything: dresses, menus, flower trials, seating charts. Brian was one of the groomsmen, which made sense. Over the years, the two of them had become close late-night card games, weekend barbecues, the occasional fishing trip. I was so focused on wedding logistics and juggling deadlines at work that I didn't immediately notice the changes at home. Brian started staying later at the office, claiming a new manager was cracking the whip. He'd come home tired, distracted. Our dinners grew quieter. When we moved into a new house 3 months before the wedding, a pretty white colonial with navy shutters and a detached garage, Brian seemed more interested in organizing his tools than unpacking boxes. He even changed the garage lock, saying he didn't want his equipment tampered with. I didn't push back. I believed him. Around that time, my old college roommate Melissa became a regular part of my life again. She worked at the same financial firm as Brian and would stop by after work sometimes for a glass of wine and a few hours of venting. She mentioned Brian seemed different lately, always stepping out to take calls or skipping office lunches. I told myself it was stress. I told her the same thing. But the gaps kept growing. One night while doing laundry, I found a receipt from a steakhouse we'd never been to: 2 entrees, 2 drinks, a dessert. When I asked Brian, said it was a client dinner. He made it sound so routine that I felt silly pressing him. And besides, there was the wedding, my own overflowing to-do list, and Kevin's anxiety about repeating our parents' mistakes. I didn't want to rock the boat, not when everything looked so polished on the outside. The night before the wedding, during the rehearsal dinner at a small Italian restaurant downtown, Kevin pulled me aside on the balcony. He admitted he was scared. What if this wasn't real? What if marrying Haley was a mistake? I told him he was overthinking it. I reminded him of how they looked at each other, but when he asked if Brian and I were happy, I couldn't meet his eyes. I told him yes, but the words stuck like dry toast in my mouth. Brian didn't show up that night, said there was an emergency at work. I waited up for him, but he didn't come home until nearly 4 in the morning. When he slipped into bed, the smell of a woman's perfume clung to his clothes. I didn't move. I didn't say a word. He whispered an apology and promised he'd be there for the ceremony. The next morning, I woke up to find a note from him saying he'd gone to help Kevin set up early. But when I stepped out of the shower, I saw it. Another message from that same unknown number. Don't go to the wedding until you check your husband's garage. There's a key in your mailbox. This isn't a joke. I stood there frozen, the towel still clutched around me, mascara brush in one hand, wondering why someone who knew that much about our house was reaching out to me now and what exactly I was about to find in the one place Brian always kept locked. I stood in the driveway, still holding the garage key in my hand. The air felt cooler than it should have for a late September morning. I could hear someone mowing a lawn down the street, birdsong overhead, the faint clatter of dishes through an open kitchen window next door. Everything felt normal, except for the pounding in my chest. The garage looked just as it always had. White siding, narrow windows, a simple overhang. But now it felt like a wall between my old life and something I hadn't yet named. I crossed the driveway slowly, stepping over a small puddle left from last night's rain. The key slid into the lock more easily than I expected. When I turned it, the sound of the bolt shifting felt louder than it should have. I hesitated just for a second, my hand on the door. Then I opened it. At first glance, it looked exactly the same. The pegboard above the workbench was still lined with Brian's tools neatly organized. A half-finished wood shelf leaned against the far wall. Empty moving boxes from our recent unpacking were stacked in the corner near the sports equipment. It all looked ordinary, almost disappointingly so. I stepped inside feeling foolish, ready to shut the door and head to Haley's parents' house. Then I saw the suitcases. They were tucked behind the workbench, half concealed beneath a gray tarp. Not our usual luggage, the old nylon ones we'd taken on road trips, but a sleek, expensive-looking set I'd never seen before, matching deep navy with brass hardware, the kind sold in luxury catalogs. All three had tags still attached. I pulled the tarp back slowly. Next to the carry-on was a manila envelope unsealed. Inside were 2 plane tickets. First class. Departing the next morning. Destination, Nassau, Bahamas. One in Brian's name, the other in Haley's. My knees buckled. I sat down on the cold concrete floor, the envelope resting in my lap. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just stared at those names printed in black ink, hoping they would change if I looked long enough. But they didn't. I set the tickets aside and reached for the folder tucked beneath them. More documents, bank statements under an account I didn't recognize. Brian's name, but not our bank, not our accounts. And the balance was staggering, well over $100,000. That wasn't possible, or at least it shouldn't have been. That money was supposed to be in our joint savings, meant for a down payment, maybe a trip someday when work slowed down. I kept going. My hands moved without thinking. Behind the bench, I found a small safe left unlocked. Inside, more papers, some with wire transfer confirmations, others with names I didn't know. I recognized one thing, though he had sold stocks in my name. I hadn't even known we owned stocks. Next to the safe was a square box lined with velvet. Jewelry I'd never seen before. A pair of diamond earrings, a sapphire pendant, a platinum bracelet. There was a small card resting on top, written in Brian's handwriting. For our new beginning. All my love. B. A wave of nausea hit me, and I pressed the back of my hand to my mouth. The concrete felt cold beneath me, grounding in a way that didn't help. The last thing I found was a folder. Inside it, printouts of messages. Some were emails, most were texts. They dated back almost 2 years. They were all from Brian and Haley. At first, I didn't want to read them. I told myself they'd explain everything, then immediately told myself they'd only make it worse. I read anyway. They wrote about how careful they had to be, about how the act was wearing on them, about how they couldn't wait to stop pretending. They planned to leave after the reception, Separate cars, meet at the airport, new identities, accounts offshore, a villa booked for 2 weeks. Haley's ticket had her real birthday on it. There was no mistaking who it was meant for. A new message came through on my phone. Same number from before. Did you find the key? You need to see what's inside. Now before it's too late. There was nothing else to see. The affair had been going on since shortly after Haley moved back to town. Every anniversary, every holiday, every dinner we'd shared with Kevin and Haley had been laced with something I couldn't see, couldn't feel, until now. In a small lockbox, I found passports, new names, photos of Brian with dyed hair, Haley too. Brian was now Daniel Porter. Haley had taken the name Elizabeth. Their documentation was flawless. Someone had helped them, had helped. The final thing I found was a letter, handwritten, from Haley to Brian. The ink smelled faintly like perfume, the same perfume I'd smelled on Brian's clothes the night before. In the letter, she talked about walking down the aisle toward Kevin, but searching the groomsmen for Brian's face. She said every vow would be a lie, that the dress was just a costume, that the end of the reception would mark the beginning of their real life together. I didn't cry, not yet. I just sat there, surrounded by evidence, unable to stand. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. A car passed. The world kept turning. Then my phone buzzed again. You can't let this wedding happen. Call me when you're ready. My name is Tessa. I'm Haley's friend from college. I can't be part of this anymore. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I called the number. A woman picked up after one ring. She sounded young, nervous. "This is Rachel," I said, my voice thin. "I found everything." She exhaled like she had been holding her breath. "Thank God," she said. "I've been trying to reach you since yesterday. I couldn't let them go through with this." "How long have you known?" I asked. Tessa was quiet for a beat. 6 months. She told me during a birthday party. She was drinking, thought it was romantic, a secret plan, a new life. I told her it was wrong. She made me promise not to say anything. "Why now?" I asked. "Why tell me today?" "She didn't just cheat, Tessa," said her voice tightening. "She bragged about it. I overheard her on the phone with Brian last week. They were laughing about your savings accounts." That's when I knew I had to do something. I closed my eyes. The concrete beneath me, the suitcases, the smell of her perfume still clinging to the letter in my hand. "What am I supposed to do now?" I asked. "The wedding's in a few hours." "You have to stop it," Tessa said. "If you don't, Kevin's going to be married to a woman who plans to disappear before the night is over." I pressed the phone closer to my ear. "Will you help me?" "I'll meet you at the church," she said without hesitation. "I know where Haley kept backup copies. We can use them if we need to." I stood up slowly, the ticket folder in one hand, the jewelry box in the other. I didn't know what I was going to say to Kevin. I just knew I had to stop the wedding before he made vows to someone who was never going to keep hers. The drive to the church felt longer than usual. I kept one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting on my bag in the passenger seat where I'd placed the tickets, the bank records, and a printed handful of messages. Traffic moved around me in waves, but I barely noticed. I tried to picture Kevin at that moment, maybe straightening his tie, maybe laughing with the groomsmen, unaware of what I had just uncovered. Every red light felt like a pause I didn't want. Every green one pushed me toward something I didn't know how to say. The church parking lot was mostly empty when I arrived. Catering staff were setting up in the reception hall next door. A florist hauled a bucket of ivory roses up the front steps. No one looked my way as I parked. I sat there for a minute, the engine off, the air conditioner ticking as it cooled. Then I spotted her, Tessa, sitting alone on a bench beneath a maple tree near the church garden. She stood as I approached, tucking her phone into her bag. "You must be Rachel," she said. Her voice was soft but steady. She looked about my age with auburn hair pulled back in a clip and eyes that searched mine as if checking for the right person. "I am," I said, nodding. We moved to a shaded corner of the garden just out of sight from the front steps. She took a seat on the stone bench and waited until I sat beside her. "She told me they met at your housewarming party," Tessa said, glancing down at her hands. That's when it started. I remembered that day. It had rained all morning, then cleared just in time for people to trickle in with potato salad and folding chairs. I remembered introducing Haley to Brian near the grill. I hadn't thought about it since. "They kept it quiet at first," Tessa continued. "Stephanie said it was just casual. Then it got more serious. She said they talked about leaving town together, starting fresh." "Why didn't she just break up with Kevin?" I asked, my voice low. "She said it wouldn't work," Tessa replied. "Brian told her that if he left you outright, he'd lose half of everything. But if they waited, if they made it look like a natural getaway after a wedding or a honeymoon, they'd have time, room to disappear." I stared down at my hands. My nails were still painted from the rehearsal dinner, chipped at the edges. I hadn't even realized I was picking at them. "She said Kevin would get over it," Tessa added, "that he'd find someone better, that you were focused on your job anyway, not your marriage." The words landed like stones. I didn't respond right away. "She said it wasn't personal," Tessa finished, but she laughed when she said it. I looked up. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "I know that couldn't have been easy." Tessa nodded. It was the right thing. We sat in silence for a moment. Then I pulled my phone from my bag and saw a new message from Kevin. "Where are you? Everyone's looking for you. Are you okay?" My throat tightened. "I need to tell him," I said, standing, "before he walks down that aisle." Tessa nodded. "I'll be nearby." I walked across the lot toward the side entrance where the groomsmen were getting ready. The hallway was quiet. I passed a line of empty chairs stacked against the wall, a table with bottled water, and finally reached the door labeled Groom's Suite. I knocked twice. "Come in," Kevin called out. I pushed open the door and found him adjusting his bow tie in front of the mirror. He turned when he saw me. "There you are," he said, smiling. "Everyone's been—" He stopped. The smile faded. "What happened?" he asked. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it for a second. Then I stepped forward and opened my bag, laying the plane tickets and papers out on the nearby table. "I need you to look at these," I said. "I found them this morning." Kevin stepped closer. His eyes moved from the tickets to the printed messages. He read quickly, flipping one page, then the next. When he reached the email about the offshore account, he sat down hard on the edge of the couch. "Haley and Brian," he said quietly. I nodded. "For how long?" "Almost 2 years." He didn't move for a moment. Then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, the papers still clutched in his hands. "We were going to leave tonight," he said. "Fly out tomorrow morning." "They had everything booked," I said. "The flights, the Villeneuve identities, all of it." Kevin rubbed his face. "What do we do now?" I sat beside him. "We don't let her go through with it," I said. "You deserve to know what you're walking into." He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood pacing the room. I watched his back as he moved toward the window and back again. "I want her to see my face when it falls apart," he said finally. "I want her to stand in front of all those people and know that I know." I hesitated. "We can stop the ceremony before it starts," I offered. "Say it's a family emergency." He shook his head. "No, she wanted to make a scene. She deserves one." There was a knock at the door. Our mom stepped in, her face creased with concern. Our father came in behind her. They both looked from me to Kevin and then to the scattered papers on the table. "What's going on?" Mom asked. Kevin handed her the folder. "It's about the wedding," he said. "It's not happening." We took the next hour to explain. Our father made a call to his law office. He arranged for someone he trusted to come document things quietly, just in case. Tessa sent over screenshots of messages she had received from Haley. She even had photos of them together days when they were supposed to be apart. The evidence kept growing. By the time the sanctuary filled with guests, Kevin had made his decision. "She's going to walk down that aisle," he said. "She's going to think she won." Then he looked at me. "When the minister asks if anyone objects, I want you beside me." I nodded. We didn't know what would happen next, but we knew the truth now, and we weren't going to let them walk away with everything. The bridal suite was crowded when I walked in, filled with curling irons, garment bags, and the faint scent of hairspray and champagne. One of the bridesmaids let out a small cheer when she saw me rushing over to help zip up my dress. Haley turned from the mirror, smiling as she smoothed the front of her gown. "There you are," she said lightly. "We were starting to think you'd gotten lost." "Car trouble," I replied, offering the excuse Kevin and I had agreed on. I kept my voice even as I reached for my earrings. "Everything's fine now." Haley's smile held for a beat longer before she turned back to the mirror. A hairdresser adjusted her veil. One of the younger cousins snapped photos near the window. I moved through the room carefully, avoiding her eyes. The final half hour before the ceremony blurred together. The photographer arrived. Flowers were passed out. The bridesmaids took turns touching up their lipstick, their laughter echoing across the tiled floor. Haley looked radiant in her dress, her makeup flawless, her posture effortless. No one watching her would have known the truth waiting on the other side of those church doors. At exactly 1:55, the coordinator called us into place. We lined up in the vestibule just outside the main doors of the sanctuary. I could hear music playing faintly from inside. The bridesmaids ahead of me whispered to each other, adjusting bouquets and smoothing dresses. I glanced across the aisle toward the groomsmen and found Brian standing there dressed in a crisp black tuxedo, laughing at something one of the others had said. When his eyes met mine, he smiled. "You look beautiful," he said softly, stepping forward and offering his arm. "Everything okay? You disappeared this morning." "I know exactly where I disappeared to," I said under my breath as we took our first step down the aisle together. "And I know where you and Haley plan to disappear to tomorrow." I felt the tension in his arm immediately. His smile flickered, but didn't vanish. He looked ahead again, nodding to someone in the crowd as we moved forward. "I don't know what you're talking about," he whispered. "Bahamas," I replied evenly. "First class. Royal Villa. It's all in your name." We reached the altar. I let go of his arm and stepped into place with the bridesmaids. He moved to stand with the groomsmen, his back straight, his expression unchanged. But I saw his eyes shift quickly toward Haley as she appeared at the back of the church. She stood there on her father's arm, veil draped over her shoulders, bouquet held steady. She smiled. The music swelled. Guests rose from the pews. As she made her way down the aisle, I watched Brian subtly shake his head. A warning, a signal. But it was too late. The ceremony had begun. Kevin stood at the altar in front of her, tall and still. His face was unreadable, but I knew what it cost him to keep it that way. Haley reached him. Her father placed her hand in Kevin's, then stepped aside. The minister began to speak. He welcomed the guests, spoke about love and commitment, the beauty of partnership, the strength of vows. I watched Haley and Brian exchange glances during the prayer. Her hand twitched slightly in Kevin's. She turned toward him, smiled again. He didn't smile back. Then the minister paused. "If there is anyone here who believes this couple should not be joined in marriage," he said gently, "speak now or forever hold your peace." A silence followed, long enough for heads to turn, long enough for Haley's eyes to begin searching the crowd. Then Kevin spoke. "I have something to say." The air shifted. A few people gasped. The minister stepped back clearly, unsure whether to continue. Kevin reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the folded plane tickets. "My bride," he said, holding them up, "has plans for tomorrow that don't include me." Haley blinked, her hand still clutched around her bouquet. "She won't be honeymooning with her husband," Kevin continued, "but with my sister's husband. First class to the Bahamas, booked and paid for with stolen money." A wave of voices rose from the pews. Haley took a half step backward, her mouth parted. Brian started forward, shaking his head. "This is ridiculous," Brian said. "He's confused." "No," I said, stepping forward. "We have proof." I held up the documents in my hand, printed messages, account transfers, the new passports. Brian's face turned pale. Haley looked from me to Kevin to the guests behind her. She dropped her bouquet. Tessa walked quietly from the back of the sanctuary, her voice clear. "I can confirm everything she said. Haley told me. I have copies of her messages. She planned to leave after the reception. New names, new identities. The villa's already booked." The room erupted again, guests whispering, chairs scraping. Haley's mother pressed a hand to her chest. One of the bridesmaids moved to steady her. Haley stepped forward, her expression tight. "Fine," she said. "Yes, it's true. Can you blame me?" Kevin didn't move. "You were always the safe choice," she continued. "But Eric, Brian, he made me feel something again." "You stole from us," Kevin replied. "You lied to both our families. You act like we were happy," she shot back. "This whole thing was just going through the motions." "No," he said quietly. "You were going through the motions. I believed in this." Brian turned toward the side exit. Two men stepped forward from the aisle, our father's investigator and an off-duty officer. They blocked his path. "Going somewhere," one of them asked. "Might want to stay a little longer." Brian raised his hands. He didn't argue. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in hours. "You threw it all away," I said. He didn't answer. Kevin turned back to the guests. "I apologize for the interruption," he said calmly. "There won't be a wedding today, but there is a full reception next door. You're welcome to join us." A murmur moved through the crowd. Some guests stood uncertain. Others moved quietly toward the exit. I stood there at the front, the papers still in my hands, watching the end of everything we had built with them. The music had stopped. The flowers hung quietly from the pews. The ceremony was over. Kevin turned to me. "Thank you," he said. We left the sanctuary side by side, not as maid of honor and groom, not as people connected by marriage or celebration, but as brother and sister, as the only two people left standing. The reception hall had been decorated with soft linens, floating candles, and centerpieces arranged with pale pink roses and hydrangeas. No one had touched the food yet. A few guests stood in quiet clusters, their voices hushed. Others wandered toward the buffet, unsure if they were still welcome. Kevin stood near the head table, not in his place as groom, but as host of a very different kind of gathering. Our father and his colleague from the firm had pulled Brian aside with the investigators. I saw them seated at a small round table in the far corner, papers spread out between them. Brian wasn't speaking much. He kept his arms crossed and his eyes low. Haley had vanished after the ceremony. Her mother followed her into the bride's room, the bridesmaids behind her, in a stunned procession. I hadn't seen any of them since the reveal. I doubted any of them would come to the reception. Kevin poured himself a glass of water from the pitcher near the cake. He took a sip, then noticed me standing nearby. "Hungry?" he asked. "Not really," I said. He nodded. "Didn't think so." Tessa arrived a few minutes later. She stepped into the room quietly, her expression cautious, and joined me near the bar. The server behind it offered us both a glass of sparkling water. I thanked him, but didn't drink. "I have more," Tessa said, handing me a folded envelope. "Screenshots, emails, dates, just in case they tried to deny anything later." I placed the envelope in my bag. "Thank you for being here," I said. She nodded once. You didn't deserve this." Kevin walked over to join us. His face was calm, but his jaw stayed tight. "They're working through everything now," he said, glancing toward the corner. "Bank documents, the passports, the transfers. Dad thinks we'll be able to recover most of it." "What about the firm?" I asked. "Brian's not going back there," he said. "Tessa, can you write a statement? They'll need an account from someone not related to us." "I can do that," she said. "Whatever you need." Guests continued to trickle out as the afternoon wore on. Some left quietly. Others offered hugs, words of sympathy, and apologies none of us had asked for. A few stayed to eat plates in hand as they filled seats at the far end of the room. The string quartet packed up early, uncertain whether to keep playing. The DJ never started. Kevin stayed until the last guest left. He thanked the caterers. He shook hands with every vendor. When the room had emptied, he walked over to the window and stood with his hands in his pockets, watching the last of the daylight fade across the parking lot. I joined him there. "I didn't think you'd go through with it," I said, "letting it happen like that." "It wasn't about the show," he replied. "It was about the truth." Neither of us spoke for a while. The quiet filled the room where laughter and music should have been. Then Kevin turned slightly toward me. "Do you want to stay at my place tonight?" he asked. "I know you've got the house to yourself." I shook my head. "I think I need to be there," I said. "I need to go back to that house and feel the emptiness for what it is." He nodded again. "I understand." As I gathered my things, I saw Brian standing in the hallway just outside the reception doors. He looked like a man waiting for a bus that would never come. One of our father's partners handed him a folder and walked away. Brian flipped through it slowly, then tucked it under his arm and stepped out the side door. I walked past him without a word. Outside, the temperature had dropped. The breeze was cooler now, rustling the trees that lined the lot. I found my car, unlocked the door, and sat for a moment before starting the engine. The drive home was quiet. No music, just the hum of tires on pavement and the occasional click of a turn signal. I pulled into the driveway around 6, parked in the same spot I had left that morning, and stared at the garage that had changed everything. The key was still in my bag, but I didn't go inside again. Instead, I unlocked the front door and stepped into the house I had shared with Brian for 5 years. It looked the same. The living room still had the couch we picked out together. The photo of us at my college graduation still sat on the bookshelf. A half-full coffee mug rested on the kitchen counter. I walked upstairs slowly past the hallway where we'd once hung family calendars and to-do lists. Our bedroom door was ajar. I opened it the rest of the way and found the bed made the closet still half full. I sat on the edge of the mattress and stared at the floor. For the first time all day, I let the silence take over. Not just around me, but inside me. Eventually, I stood, walked to the closet, and pulled out a suitcase. Not the expensive one from the garage, just the old gray roller we'd used on weekend trips. I began packing what I needed for the week. Clothes, toiletries, documents. I didn't know where I'd go yet. Maybe a hotel, maybe a friend's place. Before I zipped the bag, I walked back downstairs and took one last look around. Then I picked up my phone. "Hey," I said when the line connected. "Is your guest room still free?" Melissa's voice answered warm and immediate. "It always is." I spent the first 2 nights at Melissa's house. She gave me the guest room without hesitation, complete with fresh sheets, a small reading lamp, and a folded throw blanket at the foot of the bed. The room overlooked her backyard, where wind chimes moved gently in the breeze, their quiet notes filling the spaces I didn't know I needed filled. I didn't say much the first evening. Melissa didn't press. She just brewed tea, sat nearby, and let the silence settle the way only old friends know how to do. On the 3rd day, I drove back to our house with a cardboard box in the trunk and a small plan in my head. I parked in the same spot as always, but something about the driveway felt unfamiliar now. I unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and stood still for a moment. The air held the scent of lemon cleaner and something faintly synthetic, like cologne that had faded but hadn't yet disappeared. I walked into the kitchen, opened the cabinets one by one, and began pulling out what was mine. My grandmother's casserole dish. The plates I bought when I first got my job at the firm. The coffee mugs Brian never used. I packed them slowly, wrapping each in newspaper Melissa had saved for me. The act of sorting and folding gave my hands something to do. My thoughts followed behind, quieter but persistent. That afternoon, I met with the attorney my father had recommended. Her name was Nora Shields, a calm, sharp woman in her 40s, with a direct way of speaking that I appreciated more than I expected. She had already reviewed the documents Kevin and I submitted: bank statements, messages, the notarized statements from Tessa and Melissa. Everything was lined up neatly in a file across her desk. "There's clear grounds for financial fraud," she said, flipping through the pages. "He concealed shared assets, used your information without consent, and diverted funds without disclosure. We'll start with freezing joint accounts and notifying the mortgage lender." I nodded, unsure where to look. She paused, then added, "You're doing the right thing. It didn't feel like the right thing. It felt like signing the end of something that once held meaning." But I thanked her, signed the forms, and left her office with a folder full of paperwork and a timeline for the next steps. That evening, I called Kevin. He answered on the first ring. "I just got off the phone with the accountant," he said. "They traced the wire transfers. It's worse than we thought." How much, I asked. Almost everything, he said. The brokerage account, the emergency fund, even the IRA Mom set up for me when I turned 25. It's all been drained. I didn't respond right away. "I'm so sorry," I said finally. "You didn't do this," he replied. "They did." There was a pause between us. Then Kevin added, "I'm thinking of selling the condo. I can't keep living in that space." "I understand," I said. "I'm not staying at the house either, just going in to get what I need." "Melissa's place okay?" he asked. "She's been incredible," I said. "Like a lifeline." "She always was," he said, and I could hear the hint of a smile in his voice. The following week moved slowly. Nora submitted the court petition to begin the divorce and fraud proceedings. Kevin's attorney did the same. We filed police reports for the financial theft backed by Tessa's testimony and the digital trail Brian and Haley had left behind. The detective we spoke with said they'd seen similar cases before, just not quite as elaborate. Brian hadn't contacted me, not once. I found out through Melissa that he'd been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Tessa told me Haley's employer had already let her go after word spread. Our small town didn't hold secrets well, and by then the story had moved past whispers. People stopped me at the grocery store in line at the pharmacy, even while I filled my tank at the gas station. Some offered sympathy. Others simply stared, unsure what to say. I avoided the places I didn't have to go. I kept close to Melissa's house, close to Kevin, close to the attorney handling it all. I cooked simple meals. I went for long walks when the weather held. Some nights I sat out on Melissa's back steps and watched the wind move through the trees while the sky turned to dusk. One morning Kevin called and asked if I wanted to help him clean out his condo. He sounded steadier than he had in weeks. "There's still stuff of hers in the closets," he said. "I thought about boxing it up and dropping it at her parents' place, but I don't really want to see them." "I'll help," I said. "Just say when." We spent that afternoon filling bags and boxes, stacking them neatly by the front door. He didn't say much while we worked. Neither did I. We found a rhythm, and in the quiet between us, something settled. Not resolution, not yet, but something close. Later, we ordered takeout and ate on the floor of his living room using a flattened moving box as our table. I talked to someone at the youth center, he said between bites of lo mein. They're looking for volunteers to teach financial basics. Budgeting credit, that kind of thing. That sounds like something you'd be good at, I said. I think I need to do something useful with all this, he said. Turn it into something that helps somebody else. I nodded. Maybe I will too, I said. The first hearing took place on a gray Tuesday morning. Melissa offered to drive me, but I wanted to go alone. The courthouse was quiet when I arrived, the hallways smelling faintly of old paper and floor polish. Nora was already there, standing near the bench, seating, flipping through the file we'd prepared. She glanced up, nodded once, and said, "They're here." Brian and Haley sat side by side at the opposite table. He wore a dark suit I didn't recognize. His hair cropped shorter than I'd ever seen it. Haley kept her gaze down, her hand resting on a manila folder. Neither looked my way. The judge entered and the bailiff called the room to order. We began with the financial records, bank statements, wire transfers, account closures. Nora's voice stayed steady as she explained how each transaction tied back to them. The judge asked precise questions, and Nora answered without hesitation. When she called Tessa as a witness, the room shifted. Tessa walked in, her hair pulled back, her voice clear as she confirmed the conversations she'd overheard. She didn't look at Brian once. Kevin testified next. He brought a folder of his own copies of the withdrawals from his accounts, the forged authorization forms. His voice caught once, but he didn't falter. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, listening as the pieces lined up exactly as we had laid them out. When it was Brian's turn, he leaned forward, speaking in a calm, almost rehearsed tone. He claimed the transfers had been for joint investments and that Haley's name appeared on documents only as a convenience. Nora interrupted twice to correct his statements, presenting signed emails and text messages that contradicted him directly. Haley said little, confirming only her employment history and that she no longer worked at the company. By midday, the judge announced she had enough to proceed with both the divorce and the fraud case, setting dates for the next hearings. She granted the temporary freeze on all disputed accounts and ordered both defendants to surrender their passports. The sound of her gavel was sharper than I expected. Outside the courtroom, Kevin met me in the hallway. "You did well," he said quietly. "I didn't say anything," I replied. "That's what I mean," he said. "You didn't let them get to you." We walked out together, the echo of our footsteps following us down the corridor. Melissa was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against her car, with 2 travel mugs of coffee in hand. She didn't ask about the details, just passed me the cup and unlocked the passenger door. Over the next week, small shifts began to happen. A local news outlet ran a brief piece on the case after public court records became available. The article didn't go into detail, but it named Brian and Haley, and by the next morning the story had traveled farther than I expected. Nora cautioned me to stay quiet publicly, to let the legal process speak for itself. I agreed. Kevin called one evening to tell me that Haley's parents had tried to reach out. They left a message, he said they didn't know the full story. I didn't call back. "You don't have to," I told him. Melissa and I kept to our routines: morning coffee, evening walks, quiet meals. Some nights I read through the case file again, even though I knew every page. It grounded me to see the evidence lined up, each piece holding its place. 2 days before the next hearing, Nora called with an update. "They've offered a settlement," she said. "It's substantial, but it comes with a non-disclosure agreement." I asked for time to think. That night I sat on Melissa's porch, the crickets loud in the dark, and weighed the offer. It would end the case sooner, spare us more hearings, but it would also seal the details away. In the morning I called Nora back. "No settlement," I said. "We finished this in court." When the day came, I walked into the courthouse with my head clear. Kevin joined me at the table, Nora's file between us. The air in the courtroom felt different this time, less like a beginning, more like the middle of something that would end soon. I could feel it in the way Brian avoided my eyes, in the way Haley kept smoothing the edge of her folder. The judge reviewed the updated financial reports, then announced the trial schedule. We would have one final hearing before the ruling. As we left, Nora turned to me and said, "This is the home stretch." I believed her. The final hearing came on a bright morning, the air crisp enough to see your breath. Melissa drove me, her hands steady on the wheel, both of us quiet. When we reached the courthouse, Nora was already inside reviewing her notes. Kevin arrived a few minutes later, offering me a short nod before taking his seat beside us. The judge entered promptly, her tone measured as she reviewed the evidence one last time. Every document, every witness statement, every bank record was laid out in order. Brian sat with his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the table. Haley avoided looking at anyone. When the ruling came, it was direct. The judge granted the divorce, awarded full restitution for the stolen funds, and upheld the freeze on their accounts until repayment was complete. There would be no settlement, no quiet resolution, only the record of what they had done and the consequences that followed. The sound of the gavel felt like the last door closing. Outside, the cold sunlight hit my face. Kevin was the first to speak. "It's over," he said simply. Melissa touched my arm, and we walked toward the parking lot together, the courthouse fading behind us. In the weeks that followed, life began to settle into something steady again. The calls from Nora grew less frequent, the paperwork lighter. I started helping Melissa with small projects around her house, repainting her front porch and tending the garden. Kevin called occasionally, not to talk about the case, but just to ask how I was doing. Even Tessa stopped by one afternoon with a bag of groceries and a shy smile. There were still moments when the weight of it all would come back, seeing an envelope with the court's return address or hearing a name I didn't expect. But those moments passed more quickly now. I knew the worst was behind me. Looking back, I realized the most important part wasn't just winning in court. It was the people who stood beside me when it counted, those who told the truth, who didn't look away when things got difficult. Justice mattered, but so did knowing I hadn't faced it alone. If you've ever been in a place where the odds felt stacked against you, I hope you remember this. There's strength in holding your ground, even quietly. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is see it through to the end. Thank you for listening to my story. If it stayed with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And take a moment to think about the people who've stood by you. You might be their strength one day, too.